Hello, my name is Angelina and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my September wrap-up. So in the month of September, I read 15 books for a total of 3,780 pages and 6 hours and 48 minutes of audio listening. 6 of these books I read physically, 7 were ebooks, and 2 of them were audiobooks. This month I had an even 4-star average rating, which is my highest of any month so far this year, so that was really nice. And also, 73% of the books I read this month included some sort of diversity, which we also love to see. So first, I want to talk about Bookoplathon. If you don't know, Bookoplathon is a readathon hosted by Becca and the Books, and it is a readathon that I participated in this month, and I was going to be doing weekly vlogs for that, and September was just a very busy month. I did have some footage where I was talking about it, but I ended up deciding to just delete it all and not post it. But September was an extremely crazy, hectic month, and October is turning out to be no different. But I will be talking about the books that I read for Bookoplathon and what prompts they were for. I did not end up completing my Bookoplathon TBR at all. I believe I read 6 out of the 16 that were originally on that TBR, but it's okay. So first, let's start with the 6 books I managed to read for Bookoplathon. The first of which is What Moves the Dead by Teen Kingfisher. This was for the prompt to read a short book or book under 300 pages. This is a short little horror novella, and this was actually a reread for me. I reread this because I finally had a physical copy and I wanted to annotate it, which I did. And I, once again, gave this book 5 stars. There's not much I can say about this without spoiling it, so let me try my best. This is basically a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, and it follows our main character, Alex, who gets a letter in the mail from their friend who is sick, and Alex goes to their manor to see what's going on, and creepy things ensue from there. And that's kind of all I can say. But I absolutely love this book. I'd highly recommend it. The second book that I managed to read for Bookoplathon was Lizzie Blake's Best Mistake by Maisie Eddings. I also gave this one 5 stars. I've absolutely loved everything that Maisie Eddings has written so far. But I read this for the Bookoplathon prompt to read a book with pattern or text on the cover, and this cover is mainly just the title. But I did receive this as an e-arc through NetGalley. It has since been released, so if you want to pick it up, you can do so. But this follows our main character, Lizzie Blake, who ends up sort of having a 2-night stand with this guy named Rake, and she ends up accidentally getting pregnant. This book does have to deal with the accidental pregnancy trope, but it's actually done really well. And as someone who absolutely hates that trope, Maisie Eddings has done an amazing job writing it in a way that makes sense and is actually enjoyable to read about. And the main character of this story, Lizzie, also has ADHD, so that was some really good representation that I enjoyed seeing in books. And we always love to see some positive mental health rep. I highly recommend this one. The next book that I read for Bookoplathon was The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Sterling. I took this book out from the library and I gave it 3 stars, but I read this for the prompt autumn, or to read like a book that gives off autumn vibes. This was like a spooky little mystery book, so definitely fits those autumn vibes. This one is another one that's kind of hard to explain what it's about, but it basically follows our main character, Jane, who needs to get married, but she doesn't really want to get married, so she sort of makes up this plan to marry Dr. Lawrence, and he ends up agreeing. Once they get married, she ends up going to his manor, but he does not really want her there. He wants her to stay at his doctor's office, but due to circumstances, she ends up having to spend the night at this manor, and creepy things happen. This is a book that for the first half of it, I was absolutely loving it. I thought it was going to be a new all-time favorite. And then the other half of it happened and I was sort of just confused. I didn't really know what was going on. Like, I knew what was happening, it just made zero sense to me. And yeah, that's really all I have for that. This author is a really good writer and does atmosphere really well. And I liked one of their previous books, The Luminous Dead. It's one of my all-time favorites. But this one, just something about the last 50%, it wasn't for me. And yeah, I gave this one 3 stars. The next book I read for Bookathon was The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I read this for the community shelf prompt, which was to read a physically short book, and that was kind of just so I could read some of the mass market paperbacks that I owned. And this is the one I ended up choosing. And it's one that I had zero idea of what it was about before actually going into it, and it actually really surprised me. I gave this one 5 stars, and it has pretty much every trope that I don't like in fantasy, like super character driven, stories inside of stories, that sort of vibe. Not my thing. Absolutely adored it in here. This follows our main character, Kavot, who is an innkeeper when we first meet him. But he sort of has this like very infamous past. He's highly well known. One day he ends up meeting the chronicler, who basically just really wants to know his story, how he became who he was, all that jazz. So this is him telling his whole like life backstory to the chronicler, and I loved it. My edition is just over 700 pages, but this was still like a very easy to read book. The writing like was just really pleasant to read, I suppose. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just really worked. As much as there was nothing really happening and it was just all about these characters, I was still wanting to pick up this book every time I put it down, and I love this, and I gave it 5 stars. And the next book I read for Bookathon is one with my absolute favorite cover that I read so far this month, and that is Skin of the Sea by Natasha Bowen. And this one I read for the Bookathon prompt to randomize my TBR. This is the one that got chosen, although this wasn't the original one on my Bookathon TBR, but somewhere in the vlog that is not happening anymore, this is the one that I ended up choosing because I had to redo the randomization after DNFing the original book that was on my TBR. Anyways, I gave this one 3 stars. This follows our main character, Simi, who is in charge of collecting the souls of people who pass away at sea, and one day, she sees this guy get thrown overboard, and she goes to collect his soul to find him still alive. So she ends up saving his life instead of collecting his soul, and that ends up angering the gods. So Simi has to go on this adventure to go make amends to the Supreme Creator. This was a really solid read. I don't think it's personally for me, mainly due to the writing style. That's kind of like my only critique about this, is something about the writing style kept pulling me out of the story instead of like drawing me in. But this is definitely like a very personal like sort of thing. So I don't know. This is a really solid read. I'm really glad that I ended up getting around to it. And this cover, stunning. I already said this is my favorite cover, but yeah, a solid 3-star read. The last book that I managed to read for Bookathon was An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, and I read this for the prompt Becca Rec. And I will say that this is a reread for me. The first time I read it, I gave it 5 stars, and this time I gave it 2 stars. The first time I read this book, I was probably in like 9th grade, probably like 14, maybe 15, I don't know. But it doesn't hold up. It does not hold up, in my opinion. This is about our main character, Isabel, who is a really good painter, and she's known in her world for being a really good painter. And she has the attention of the Fae, who she is constantly painting. They're like paying her in like magic to paint them. And one day she ends up having this opportunity to paint a Fae prince. And when she does, she ends up painting him with emotion in his eyes, which is a big no-no in this world. So he ends up whisking her off to the Fae world to sort of pay for her crimes, and they end up falling in love. Do I understand why younger me really enjoyed this? Absolutely. I totally get it. But this time, I was bored. All the characters are very flat and one-dimensional. Like, in theory, this is like a really like fun read, but nothing happens in this book. I was super bored. I kind of wanted just more. I just wanted more from this story, and I did not get that. It didn't work out. This is the first book I've read this year, or this is the first book that I reread this year that I haven't enjoyed the same amount as when I have first read it. So that's interesting. Yeah, this is a 2-star read. It wasn't for me. So on to just the rest of the books that I read that had nothing to do with Bookathon. I read The Kiss Curse by Erin Sterling. I gave this 3 stars. This was an influencer copy from Libro FM, so thank you to them. This book follows Gwen, who runs a witchcraft shop, and one day this guy named Wells, who is from a very prominent witch family, ends up coming to town and starting his own witchcraft shop right across the street from her. They sort of have this sort of like business rivals to lovers relationship, but there's also sort of a little mystery subplot to this when Gwen starts to lose her magic and she has to find out who's stealing her magic. This is like that perfect autumn transition book. It's super atmospheric, super with like the small town fall vibes. You got all those little like fall witchy vibes. It's nice. It's very pleasant to read. But yeah, this was just a solid read. It wasn't really my thing. I don't think witchy romances are my thing, but you know, I get why others like it. I just sort of kind of wanted either more from the romance or more from the mystery. Like, I don't think I'm a romance mystery combo type reader, and you know, that's fine. I still understand why people like this book. I have no problems with this book. It was just a solid 3-star read. And the next book that I read was another audiobook, and this one was Through Neck Alley, and this one is Vanessa Jared Gets a Man by LaQuette. This is another one I also gave 3 stars to. This book follows Vanessa, who is a few years out of being in an abusive relationship. And one day this guy named Michael shows up on her door asking her for a favor. And that favor is for her to help him stop his younger sister from getting married to her abusive ex-husband. She ends up agreeing to do this, and along the way, Vanessa and Michael fall in love. So again, another solid 3-star read. I really enjoyed listening to the audiobook of this. I will say, for me personally, I sort of found Vanessa and Michael's relationship to be very insta-lusty, and it's sort of written in a way that as they spend more time together, it gets more sort of like emotionally romantic. But while it was written that way, it wasn't really coming across to me that way. Again, that's fine. Like I said, it's a solid read. 3 stars. I'd still recommend it. Next, I read Jujutsu Kaisen's Volume 1 through 3 by Geiji Akutami. And Volumes 1 and 2 I discuss more in my mid-month wrap-up, which will be linked in the cards above and in the description below. But Volume 1 I gave 5 stars to, and then Volumes 2 and 3 I gave 4 stars. But yeah, Volume 3 was really great. I liked meeting these new characters, sort of exploring this world and their like magic system more, I suppose. It's fun. I really enjoy it. I think if you really like the anime of this, you'll really like the manga. They're extremely similar. But yeah, I'm having a fun, enjoyable time reading these mangas. And in the same vein, I read Spy Family Volumes 1 through 3 by Tatsuyo Endo. and I also talk about all three of these in my mid-month wrap-up. I gave volumes 1 and 2 4.5 stars and volume 3 5 stars. Again, this is very similar to the anime. If you like the anime, you'll really enjoy the manga. Fun read, highly recommend them. And I'm reading them as my library ends up getting them. So I will, in fact, be continuing the series. And the last book that I have to discuss with you all this month is Ruination by Anthony Reynolds. This is, as it says, a League of Legends novel. I have not played League of Legends. I'm not really sure if I'm going to, but I have watched the Netflix show Arcane, which is based in the same sort of League of Legends universe. And if you enjoy Arcane, you'll love this. But this is my favorite book of the month, probably of the year. I gave it 5 stars. And I did end up buddy reading this with my friend, so it was a lot of fun getting to sort of talk about this with her while reading it. This is an adult fantasy novel that is very easy to read and get into. So if you're scared of sort of jumping into adult fantasy, I do think this is a great place to start. But this follows our main character, Callista, who is sort of the military general, advisor, council person to King Viago. And one day, King Viago's wife, Isolde, ends up getting struck with this poisonous blade, and there is no cure. And the king starts going mad with grief as Isolde is slowly dying, and he ends up tasking Callista on sort of this quest to go find this sort of hidden island that may possibly contain a magical cure for her. I have extremely tabbed this book up. I love this book so much. Besides this just being really easy to read and follow, the characters are also just so well done. And like the whole world building and everything, there's also, for this being a fantasy novel, this does have a lot of like twists and turns and unexpected things that like I didn't see coming. While reading this, I was sort of predicting a lot of things, and you know, some of them I got right, but there were also a lot of events that happened in here that I just had no clue were coming, and I absolutely love that about this. I hope there is sort of like a sequel or spin-off or something else. I want to read more in this world with these characters. I loved it. I highly recommend. But that is all of the books that I managed to read in September. Definitely did not stick to my TBR at all, but that's okay. And yeah, that's it for this video. So don't forget to leave a like and subscribe and comment whatever you feel like commenting. But I will see you all in the next video. Bye!